So I respect the fact that what works for me doesn't work for other people. But I also won't accept that, I'm being harassed because people don't like what works for me. Like, this is the thing that's really difficult in the autism communities, that people are trying to make it that we're one voice.
Tony Hernandez Pumarejo, writer and author, professional and motivational speaker, TV presenter, life coach, an international ambassador for autism and mental health. He is proud to invite you to his podcast, My Time, with Tony Hernandez Pumarejo.
Hi, and welcome to this new episode of My Time with Tony Hernandez Pumarejo. And this is your host, Tony Hernandez Pumarejo. I'm truly honored and privileged to have you here today, either watching me or listening to me in this new episode. And today I had the honor and privilege of interviewing Miss Eileen Lamb. Eileen is an autistic self-advocate and also a parent to her autistic children. She's the author of the books called All Across the Spectrum and Be the One. And she's the founder of the Autism Cafe. Eileen is also a writer, photographer, and podcast host. And she's also the director of social media for Autism Speaks. Born in France, Eileen now lives in Austin, Texas with her two sons, Charlie and Jude, and their sister Billy. On her blog, she shares the ups and downs of raising two autistic children, one with profound autism while being on the autism spectrum herself. So, her story is very inspirational, and she has been a true, strong advocate for our community. So without further ado, let's go to the interview that I had with Miss Eileen Lamb of the Autism Cafe. It is my honor and privilege to have you here today, Eileen. Thank you so much for, for coming in today in My Time with Tony Hernandez Pumarejo.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Tony.
Thank you. It is an honor and privilege to have you, Eileen. Your story is very inspirational. It's a story that, as a parent and yourself also being autistic, I mean, I'm going to ask you, with you being an advocate, being a parent to to your three children, being an entrepreneur, an author, a writer, employee. My question is, how do you do all of this? I mean, what helps you to overcome so much, so many, tasks on your daily living? How do you do this?
It's all about balance, and all of these things, they don't happen at the same time, because I'm working when my kids are at school, for instance, and I'm writing when my kids are asleep. And so there is like a time for everything. And I feel like everything fits perfectly into my life. And you can see that there is a common theme into everything I do. I feel like everything has a link to autism. I work at Autism Speaks as the director of social media because, of course, as an autistic mother to two autistic children, I mean, autism is like such a big part of my life. So I don't think I could work somewhere that doesn't have a, autism connection. So even though it's my job, it feels like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like I'm working, because you know what they say, you don't work a day in your life if you're working doing something that you love. And I love advocating for autistic people in our community. So for me, it's really great. The kids are at school. Well, my youngest Jude is at school, and not my youngest, he's my middle child now. See, my baby is 1, and I still call my middle child my youngest because I'm not used to having three children yet. But school, and Charlie's in therapy all day, so it gives me time to do those things I love, and I love working, I guess. And then when the kids go to sleep, I just I write, and that's how I was able to write those 2 books.
Yeah, and you do so much. I'm very proud of what you do. Your story is very inspirational. I believe, and this, that our community is in that with you because you have different perspectives. You as an autistic self-advocate, as an autistic parent, an entrepreneur, a leader, for our community. Your perspective is very valuable. And I'm also proud to call you my colleague, working with Autism Speaks. We have done great things together. And Eileen, I ask, this next question I'm going to ask you, I ask everybody, in my podcast. I ask you, how do you define the life of Eileen Lamb in just a few words?
If I have to use just a few words, I'm a passionate advocate for the autism community, and also a mother and a writer, and someone who just pours her heart into everything she does.
That's it, and that's what it is. The story of Eileen Lamb. If people ask me, what's the story of Eileen Lamb, and they told me to define it in this case one word, I will call it perseverance. You're a very perseverant individual. Working with so many things, in the community, personal life, work, balance, parent. I mean, you have to do so many things, and I think the perseverance is the best quality that I can describe Eileen Lamb. And Eileen, let's, about this amazing story, let's go back from the beginning. Let's talk about how it all started, about yourself, your childhood, where you come from, and tell us about your life as you were growing up.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised in France. That's why you hear an accent. And, I had a good childhood, but there were a lot of things that didn't come easy to me. I always felt like I was on another planet, like I could never really fit in with my peers. It was always really strange to look at the kids around me and feel like I was missing something, It's like I couldn't quite understand why these things were important to them and not to me, why they were laughing at me and not with me. And it was interesting. I only really got along with people when we shared the same interest, because then I could go all in and tell them all about it. And, it was just like, but so my life in France, my childhood, it was a mix of, and that's all I ever knew. So I didn't even know it was not a normal experience. You know what I mean? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? So if people don't tell you that they don't feel the same way you do, I mean, you're not just going to assume that they're feeling differently than you. I was thinking that, oh, well, everyone is probably feeling the same way to a certain extent. But really, when I grew up and when I reached like 15, 16, when I was a teenager, and everyone was enjoying things again that I just couldn't enjoy, like going to concerts. That was like so big, parties. And, I like parties all right, but I had to, and, I'm opening up here. I couldn't like socialize unless I had like a drink or two before. Like I needed something to be able to interact with people. I couldn't go to like the fireworks. Like that's a big thing in France on the July 14th, because that's the national, day in France, Bastille Day, as you call it here. And I remember like for a few years, like a few years in a row, trying to like go with everybody, and I just couldn't do it, And I think that's a story I mention a lot, because it was really shocking to me to see everyone like so like happy about like, oh yeah, we're gonna go see the fireworks, and like they love like being in the crowd and the noise and the lights. And I'm just like, I couldn't even like, I was like thinking about it weeks before, having anxiety and trying to work myself up to it, and I just couldn't do it. So anyway, there were a lot of ways in my life where I just felt like I didn't fit in. Yeah, and there was some bullying too, which we can get into later. But so that was my life. Not, neutral, not super happy, not bad, but I definitely felt different from a young age.
And that's very common. I mean, with many different stories in our autism, not only autism, but also, disability, community. in this case of autism, that you feel that that was something different about you, even though you don't know what was exactly was. At what age were you diagnosed with autism?
So I was 25. It's only until I came to the US and that my oldest son was diagnosed that I put the pieces together.
Okay, so that's where it was a confirmation in terms of what it was. And going, you went through that transition, moving from not only a country, but also a continent, as well, to the US. Being born and raised in a different country, in this case, France. Before you moved to the US, did you had some conceptions about the US before you move in? And how did it change after you move into the US, especially moving to Austin and Texas?
It's funny because I feel like a lot of people, especially in France, like when they think about America and the United States, they just kind of like make fun of it. Oh yeah, all the burgers and like unhealthy food, and they have like a lot of judgment about it. And to me, and I grew up watching TV shows that were like all in America, like how is it called in America? Seven Heavens, I think is what you call it. It's like all that family with all the kids. Anyway, and like seeing the yellow school bus and like all of these kids, and it seemed like accepting, and they had like cool things we didn't have in France. And I don't know, the yellow bus to me was something that I was like, one day I'm gonna ride that yellow bus. Never happened, but anyway, so I've always like really seen America as the American dream, which a lot of people also do. It's not all like the negative. And I wasn't happy in France by the time I reached like 20, 21. I kept losing all of my friendships. I didn't understand why. I couldn't get I had gotten my high school degree, couldn't get a degree past that, because every time I tried going to the university, I would just have a meltdown because there were too many people. And again, I didn't know why. I was just like, what is wrong with me? It's not like I can have like a beer at 7 a.m, like before going to class, so I just stopped going, and I had nothing going on in my life except, I playing online poker, the game, Texas Hold'em. And so that was what I was doing. I was earning money doing that, but it's like, that's not life. I'm not gonna, that could be life, but I knew it wasn't realistic. I wasn't gonna be a professional poker player. So anyway, I looked into ways to go to the United States, on a visa. And the one way was to be an au pair, which is like a nanny taking care of a kid. So that's what I did. And I found a family in Austin, Texas. And I kid you not, after one day here, I had never felt that in my heart. I had never felt this good. And I didn't even speak the language yet, except like, hi, how are you? Like very basic language. But everyone was like smiling. Like I was walking down the street and people were saying hi to me. And it was just like the weirdest, but in a good way, like experience. I felt like I was accepted. Like no one cared how I was like dressed or how I behaved. It was just like I felt accepted like right away, and it was just like mind-blowing to me. And well, it's no surprise that 12 years later I'm still here. Yeah,
That's very interesting. In terms of your perspective and how you look at things, how your life was going before coming to the U.S., and how your perspective and view evolved moving after moving to the U.S. And it's very interesting because this is the topic I wanted to talk to you about, because not only it's not only autism specific, but there's always a comparing contrast between countries. For example, Europe has better healthcare than here, or it's better than this area than here. And I think it's very important to realize that Europe is a continent, and there's differences between the countries. For example, now going back to autism, the other day, I was sending letters, I was sending proposals to autism organizations and special needs organizations around the world. And it was very interesting to see the number of organizations per country in terms of a ratio, how many organizations were in this country compared to this. For example, and I'm going to use your home country, France. When I was doing research in France, and I didn't see too many autism or special needs organizations in France in comparison, for example, to Spain, which, neighboring countries. I saw that Spain has more, and I can tell you from experience, because I've been to Europe one time, and that was when I went to Spain because my brother lives in Spain, and I went to this autism organization when I was there. But the very high number of autism organizations in Spain in comparison to France is very interesting. And I know that there's been talk about in terms of, in other countries, not only France, but other countries, they look autism or special needs as something more of a burden still. They have that mindset that was like, pre-age mindset about autism. And I want to talk to you about, as you grew up in France, and I know you're best person to share this with us. What was some of the challenges or stigmas the special needs families face in your home country? Can you go in detail about those challenges? And if it's possible, compare and contrast in terms of services in France to those in the US.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like a lot of people are going to be surprised, but if you have an autistic child, you don't want to be in France. Like people think of France as, oh, wow, universal healthcare. Well, did you know that like in my hometown, like it takes a year to get an appointment just to get like an eye exam?
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, that was an article in the newspaper in my hometown, like last week. Did you know that only 20% of autistic kids have access to appropriate education in France? Most of them, are not in school. And, ABS therapy, for instance, there are only, I don't want to say a number, but you can count on two hands the number of ABS centers in France. We're talking about a country. Just in Austin, Texas, where I live, I think we probably have like 20, 25, probably more. I'm not even counting anymore, And not only that, but most of the time in France, insurance doesn't cover therapy. So great, you have free healthcare, like if you have a cold, but if you have a child with autism, you're going to be paying out of pocket, for everything. And you're going to be struggling to get services because the waiting lists are insane, which, it's an issue in the US too, to a lesser extent. But in France, getting care, I mean, from what I've heard from people who follow me, it is horrible. And things are changing, but very, very slowly. I mean, just autism diagnosis in France, it's still like, I don't know the exact stats, so I'm not going to say, but like in the US, we're 1 in 36 children being diagnosed with autism. I know that just a few years ago, it was 1 over 200 in France. And I think they're in the hundreds now. So it's getting better. Again, don't get me wrong, but there is a long, long, long way to go. When I was growing up, again, I didn't know I was on the spectrum, even though I was a textbook autistic child. I mean, it's pretty funny looking back on it, but I was diagnosed as, and it's not even a diagnosis because my mom took me to some specialist, and they said, well, she's shy and she's gifted. It's like, what does this tell you now? You say that, like, don't you think like Asperger's, like right away? Well, like the pieces were there. I learned to read when I was 3, read and write, which was like hyperlexia. And, they just put a bunch of like, they had explanations for everything, none of it was autism. And I just feel like nowadays I would have been diagnosed, like, no problem. And maybe even in the US back then in the 90s, I wouldn't have been diagnosed because there's been, not just in France, but here too, diagnosis criteria, especially for girls, has become, not different, but doctors know more about autism in girls and all of that. But another thing about France and the stigma is that, for instance, I had therapy as a teenager. I went to therapy. on my own. I made that decision because, like I said, I was like, why am I losing all of my friendships? Why do I feel so different? And there is such a stigma around mental health that I would put a hoodie on my head when I entered the building to go to therapy, because people make fun of you, because only crazy people go to therapy. That's what people think in France. Not all of the people, but there is a big stigma around that and mental health. Again, I think it's getting better, but it's still not there. Even like recently, a politician, very famous politician in France, said something like, well, I heard them, I'm not autistic, in a speech. And I was like, what, since 5-6 years ago? I mean, there are just so many things that are wrong about France and autism. I know so many families who are trying to move, even like to Belgium, Switzerland. A lot of them are trying to move to the US, but you don't get a visa like that, you know. It's really difficult to move to a different country, to the US when you're from Europe. Yeah, it's just bad. And yeah, you know, we pay for insurance here a lot, but like Charlie gets 40 hours a week of ABA therapy, 40 hours. And it's just like, wow, you know. So we get insurance, you and I, through Autism Speaks, which we pay for monthly. I mean, Charlie is on my insurance and I pay nothing for ABA. I just pay for the insurance, right? And that's 40 hours a week. And I think that's just like, that's incredible. And, you know, I'm struggling with the school district with Charlie, but at the same time, he's at school and at least, you know, I can fight. I'm just like fighting for more for him. But in France, he wouldn't even be at school. And there is no law that makes that he has to go to school. So at least here I have something to fight for. In France, I would have nothing, you know? And the one time I went back to France since moving to the US, which was 2015, yes, 2014. I haven't been to France in almost 10 years. Yeah. See how I feel about France. Charlie was having a meltdown. He was like 1.5. He hadn't been diagnosed yet. And the guy walks by and say, wow, like this child is so rude. He needs like better parenting. Seriously? Like, I've been in the US for like what, 12 years now, and Charlie has had a lot of meltdowns. And yeah, you know, some people stare and look, but no one has ever said anything that rude. And that was just like 1 week of my life since becoming a parent in France, and I got that rude comment. So yeah, there it is. Yeah. I feel like I just like ranted about France so much. People are gonna think I hate France, and a little bit, but you know, not that much.
Well, I'm interested in visiting France, so just to see how it is. You know, it's very interesting, and your perspective is very, you know, it's very valuable because you've been there. You were born and raised there. It's not like you go to, let's say, Reddit and say, "Oh, go to France or go to the Spain. Everything is wonderful: healthcare, housing, social services, education." But one thing is on the forums, and another thing is in reality when you go there. Obviously, everything's case by case. And as I mentioned, you know, we have the continents. Europe is not the same. There's different, you know, countries have differences, cultures, systems. Here in even the U.S. here, you know, the states are not all the same. Some states have more services than others. And not only that, another area that I think we need to, which we focus on more, is in terms of the comparison of services between metro areas and rural areas. Recently, I did an article on my blog, which I talk about, for example, the challenges that Hispanic families that have loved ones on the spectrum face in rural areas, comparing contrast to metro areas, let's say Florida, California, Texas, New York, for example. So I think that, you know, obviously the consensus here is that if you're in the metro area, there's a higher chance you will get the services that you need. But if you're in a rural area, then unfortunately, sadly, it's going to be super difficult to get services. And so it's very interesting, you know, from your perspective and your experience in being in a different country, How has things worked there so far? And it's great. And yeah, you mentioned something very important as well. It's the stigma, especially with mental health. Mental health is something that unfortunately there's still a lot of stigma everywhere, and that's an area that we need to work on as a society, because mental health is real. Mental health crisis is real. There's no stigma. There's no faking it. It's real. And I very appreciate you sharing that perspective, Eileen. So now from France, we're gonna transfer to the US. So we won't speak about French
Good.
anymore. Let's go to the good old USA. Let's talk about now you as a parent. Just want to confirm, at what age was Charlie diagnosed with autism? And also your son, Jude.
Charlie was 22 months old and Jude was 5.
Okay. And if you can share with us a little bit about your experiences, especially with both of them, how you navigate their evaluation, diagnosis, intervention. What was the difference in terms of experience, raising and helping Shirley and also helping you? What were some, similarities and also some differences, if you can share that with us?
Yeah, I mean, so Charlie was diagnosed first. Charlie's my 10-year-old. He was diagnosed when he was 22 months old. He started losing his words when he was 18 months. And, I was a first-time mom, and I was speaking French and English to him, and I was like, well, maybe it's just the bilingual thing. Like, it's harder for him to, pick up on language, keep it up. But anyway, I took the MChat, which is, was the online MChat was funded by Autism Speaks, which something I learned recently is that before the MChat, Autism Speaks, made the MChat available online. People had to, fill out the MChat questionnaire, send it in the mail, and wait for the results back. That's how it was before. So big kudos to Autism Speaks for that. So the MChat, if you don't know, is an online questionnaire. Well, now it's online. And it asks 20 questions about your child, things your child does or doesn't do. And any score above 3 is a risk for autism. Again, 20 questions. Charlie scored 18. So we called early intervention, which is free or low cost in every state. Just Google early intervention and your state. And he was evaluated, and he qualified for speech therapy, OT. I mean, he qualified for everything. He was like so behind. And again, I felt bad because as a mom, like I didn't know how, he was my first child. I didn't know he was supposed to be pointing. I didn't know he was supposed to be clapping, like these things that, of course, hindsight is 2020 now makes sense. So we got a little bit of therapy with ECI. He was like 20 months at that time. But they told me quickly, he needs more. You need to get him evaluated for autism. And we got an appointment with a developmental pediatrician, and he was diagnosed at 22 months old with autism. And it's like at that point, I wasn't surprised anymore because, I had started learning about all of it. They recommended ABA therapy for him. I went off to Google and I was like, oh my God, what is going on?
We're going to talk about that in just a little bit, about the ABA and the debates.
Yeah, so lots of controversy, but, Charlie got ABA therapy. Yeah, it was just my life's changed at that point. And so, by the time Jude was Charlie's age, when Jude was around 2 years old, he was talking, but, not a lot. He had a lot of steaming, a lot of sensory issues, and just like I was, a little like nervous about what was going on, but he was like very social. He has that personality, he's always happy, going to people, and he had some special interest. Around 3 years old, he started being like really interested in math and like really good at it. And then by 5, it became clear that it wasn't just like quirky, and like it was also autism. But Jude was diagnosed with level 1 autism, which is probably what you're diagnosed with too, Tony.
Back then was Asperger's.
Asperger's,
Yeah.
which I guess now goes into level 1. Yeah. And same with me. And then there is Charlie, but Charlie is diagnosed with level 3 autism, which now we can call profound autism. And his behaviors are like so severe. He's nonverbal, at 10 still. He has something called pica too, which is that he can't help but put non-edible items in his mouth. Recently, he swallowed a screw. A surgeon had to get the screw out of his colon. It feels like almost 2 different diagnoses to me. So same diagnosis for 3 of us in my family, but we're all so different from each other,
Yeah, and it's very interesting, and recently, yesterday, in fact, I watched the documentary. There was an Autism Speak about the challenging story, you and Charlie. And I seen through your social media about the challenges with pica, and also what you mentioned earlier was about the fight within the school district and fighting for the rights of Charlie to make sure that he's getting the support that he needs towards the development. And it's not easy, you have to deal with these challenges not only as a parent but also living on the spectrum at the same time. And as you mentioned, there's 3. There's you, Charlie, and Jude, but each of you has a different, story and some similarities, but also differences. And if you can go, in terms of, and I know it's an ongoing process, what has helped you, both as a parent and as an advocate to work with these challenges of not only the challenges that Charlie and Jude has faced, but you have faced as well in this process. What has helped in this process, if you can share that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for Charlie, what's helped the most is ABA therapy. There's like no doubt. He got into it when he was 2 years old, and by the time he was 3, they had taught him to communicate using an AAC device. And it's just incredible to see him go from like screaming all day, like no kidding, screaming and screaming because he couldn't communicate, to being able to make himself heard. It was like incredible. And they're still helping him now, like with the pica. Like no one wants to deal with Charlie because, I mean, he's a liability, his behaviors are like so dangerous and so scary. And, he's my son. I love him. I can say he's a handful, and I can understand why someone like would feel scared of like watching him because of how severe his behaviors are. But ABA, they haven't given up on him, and they're still trying to teach him, and I'm very thankful for that. For me, it's more about, and that was the thing with my diagnosis. It's like, I feel like if I had gotten help earlier, a lot of the struggles I went through as a child, I probably wouldn't have if I had known I was on the spectrum. And like, that was the one thing I regretted when I was diagnosed was, darn it, so it wasn't me. Like, there was nothing wrong with me. I was just different. I needed like to be communicated with differently, and I wish I had known that earlier. But now, just like one-on-one therapy for me is great because I know what to focus on, and I know why I struggle with what I struggle with. And with Jude now, I feel like he's the one who's gonna like get I don't know, for whom it's gonna be the easiest, because now he has my, I've been there, like I know what his struggles, like just earlier, like he didn't want to go to the playground because there are people. He was afraid of that, and I totally can relate to a lot of his worries. And yeah, Jude did some ABA too, but really the thing for him is that he has a lot of anxiety too. He needs to be challenged. His brain is going constantly. He has so much going in his brain. And so we had to change school because the public school just wasn't working for him either, but for different reasons than Charlie. And Yeah, so he's in a private school now, and we're just trying to keep him challenged and busy, so he doesn't get bored, and also so he doesn't get bullied, because he dealt with that too. And he was, in first and second grade. And I was like, no, he's not gonna go through that. He's just a kid already, and changing school has really helped with that. The public school, and his teachers were great, but they're so overwhelmed in public school. Like, there is only so much they can do, when the school doesn't have the funding. And so, yeah.
Oh, definitely. And it's a process. All this is a process. It's ups and downs in this process, and you have done, a tremendous job under the stress, the pressure, in providing the best quality of education. I mean, not only education, but also in terms of quality of life for your children and your family. And that's the most important thing. And it's an ongoing process, and you learn from this. And very proud of what you have done. And your story, again, can be a great sample, or a leading example for not only autistics, but also parents as well with special needs children. And Eileen, now, speaking about the wonderful ABA therapy, unfortunately, as you know, there are these debates out there in the autism world about ABA therapy, the first, the third use of language, or I don't know, they come with different terms. First, autism, autistic, neurodivergent is like so many terms. Then we had the debates of the parents against autistics, and real autistics, actual autistics, criticism of organizations, seeing autism as a disability or superpower, all of this, that this very well. My question for you is, today, and I know you have dealt with this as an advocate, what you think about all of these debates? What has helped you in terms of dealing with these debates? Do you think that these debates are really taking us closer to what I believe should be the mission in regards to autism, which is quality of life, or these debates are continuous to take us away from that mission? What is your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's what keeps me going through all the, social media hate, because people don't necessarily agree with the things I find helpful for my family, for myself. It's just that it works for me. It works for thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people. So I respect the fact that what works for me doesn't work for other people. But I also won't accept that, I'm being harassed because people don't like what works for me. Like, this is the thing that's really difficult in the autism communities, that people are trying to make it that we're one voice. And it's just not how it works, because we're all different people. I mean, just like we've been talking about, like, it's 3 autistic people in my family. And, I'm closer to Jude, our struggles than Charlie, but we're still different. You and I, same diagnosis, different struggles, different strengths. And so when people go on social media and say, well, autistic people hate the puzzle piece, like, excuse me, no, I mean, I don't. I know lots of people who don't. So speak for yourself, and people can't do that. They always have to make it, something that it's not. And it's just frustrating. And honestly, I don't know, maybe that's the French in me, but the more I feel like people are wrong in a way, they're coming at me, the more I'm gonna fight back. It's the revolution. Okay, well, you're trying to silence me, well, I'm just gonna shout it louder, because there are a lot of people who agree with me. There are a lot of people who are scared to speak up on social media because you've bullied them into silence with things that are not true. So now I'm gonna speak louder for those who are too scared to take that social media hate. So that's what keeps me going, because I know that we're a majority, but that the other people, they're so vocal that you would think that there are too many of them, but really they're a vocal minority, because most people, they don't just go on someone's social media and insult them. They don't go and say, wow, you're abusive for putting yourself into therapy. Oh, I'm going to call CPS because your child is having like a cookie. Like these things are just like so stupid, right? I mean, let's call them that. I think it's okay for someone to say, hey, I had a bad experience with an ABA therapist. Totally fine to say. But to say ABA therapy is abusive and to generalize, that's where I draw the line. I think people need to understand that they need to share their personal experience. I'm only speaking for myself right now as one autistic person. I don't pretend to speak on behalf of the entire community, and no one should. And I think that's important to remember.
Well said. And it's okay to have differences. That's not, in reality, that's not the issue here. It's okay to have differences. It's the way that unfortunately different individuals approach those differences and go to the insult and the attack and the personal attack unnecessarily. I mean, it's proclaiming that they speak for everybody, which is completely false, which is completely BS. I mean, I can only speak for myself too, about my perspectives as an autistic person, and also as an advocate and working with this community, parents, and autistic individuals, from all parts of the world. And I think that if we don't take care of those issues, again, pointless attacks, unnecessary attacks, then I believe we're not going to go farther in our mission. That's the way I see it. There's been progress, yes, but there's still much more that needs to be done. And, going along these lines, Eileen, I also wanted to ask you, because we talk about autism, right? Social media, your story, my story, and the story of millions of people of this community around the world. We talk about awareness, then acceptance. And yes, we talk about, the symbols, apostles, which is all important. All of that is important. But what do you think? And I've been thinking about this because, from my end, thinking about, okay, what is missing right now in autism? What is missing to take us closer to that mission of making sure of getting everybody, no matter where you are on the spectrum or who you are with other condition, to get the best quality of life possible. From your experience and perspective, what do you think is missing? What else do you think that we can do better in regards to autism, and provide the resources and the support for families and loved ones that have loved ones on the autism spectrum? What do you think?
I think two things, and they're very different. First of all, I think the autism and autistic community needs to come together, because right now there's a lot of infighting. And at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. We want more like services, more support, more awareness, more acceptance for autistic people. But the fighting on social media about like symbols, terminology, and all those useless things, honestly, it's not accomplishing that. Another thing is we need more awareness of profound autism. And I speak about this because it's something very close to my heart with my son, Charlie. I feel like, and that makes sense, I feel like there is more awareness of, level 1 Asperger's, because by definition, we're able to self-advocate, right? So we're going to be on social media talking about it because we can. Someone like my son, Charlie, can do it. So it requires the parents doing it. But when parents do it, they get attacked, right? So it's really difficult. And also, I feel like at this point in time, people want the feel-good story. The autistic person, nonverbal until age 7, graduated high school. But that's not a reality for a lot of autistic people, As much as I would love for Charlie to graduate high school, if at 18 he's able to not see a screw and eat it, I will be happy. That's my goal for Charlie. It's not for him to graduate. Does it mean that it's, you know, not worthy of celebration if he reaches that goal. No, it's just that we have different goals, and I feel like we should be able to celebrate these goals that are not like media worthy. You know, it's not gonna get a headline in the newspaper, but for my family that would be incredible. You know, if Charlie gets to the point where he can understand that eating a screw is dangerous, and that's a goal that should be celebrated just as much as someone who's able to graduate high school. And I think we need more awareness. We need more awareness for people to understand that, you know, not all of autistic people are going to be able to be like you and me and others. There are some autistic people who have very severe behaviors, and they need so much support. And right now the support is not there. I can tell you, you know, I was singing the praise of the United States, but it also varies by state, right? Some states are so much better. And I'm in Texas, and when it comes to autism services, we're at the bottom. And Charlie has been on the waiting list for respite care, for instance, for, I don't know, 8 years, I want to say at this point, 7 or 8 years. And they told me it's going to be an additional 15 years. 15 years. Like, that's how long I have to wait for more help for Charlie, you know, and that's not okay. And how are we going to get that help? By talking about it. You know, let's spread even more awareness. People often say we don't need awareness, we need acceptance. How do you get acceptance? By raising awareness, right? So we still need a lot more awareness, because I bet you that most people haven't heard of pica, you know, which is a very common co-occurring condition with autism, for instance. And we hear a lot about level 1 autism and not so much about profound autism. And I think it's important to get more services.
I'm with you, and talk about the different issues that are not talked about enough in autism, even going to adulthood. For example, in terms of the justice system, you know, in terms of the interaction with the law enforcement, for example.
Right.
There's a reality that there's a lot, you know, there are autistic individuals that are in jail right now and they're innocent. Why we're not talking about that right now, for example, in terms of the legal and, you know, system. Also, faith-based initiatives. I'm also, you know, a big proponent, you know, of working with faith-based organizations. And to be honest, they haven't done enough. You know, there are some organizations, faith-based organizations, that do a tremendous job, but I want to see much more from the churches and the community in terms of special needs families. That's one area we need to talk about. Guardianship, housing, and jobs, healthcare, the waivers. You mentioned about the waiver, the long wait, you know, for where I am in Florida, the ridiculous waiting list of 7 to 14 years, which is outrageous and BS. You know, that's I'm calling it like it is. Those are the things that need to be talked about, because again, all of this go into the mission of quality of life, and that's what the mission of autism is. Awareness is important, acceptance is important, action, education, all of that is important. We need to talk about, you know, profound, severe autism. We need to show it all. And the key is how to get those resources and supports to help. Now, because again, another thing I want to also mention is that autism not only impacts the person with a diagnosis, but also the family. You know, parents that have to give up their job to take care of their loved ones. And through my job, I receive those calls every day. You know, what's going to happen when I'm not there for my son, for my daughter anymore? The siblings have to take, you know, will the siblings be able to take care of the child? The uncles? You know, there's a lot of questions about that. And those are the things we need to talk about autism more often.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, for mentioning the families, because, you know, there is that belief that only autistic people should be speaking about autism. Like, that's something I hear a lot from people on social media. And no, because, I mean, almost at least a third of autistic people wouldn't even be able to self-advocate. So if you're only giving a voice to autistic people and not their family members, you're only going to be hearing about, you know, maybe half, 2/3 of the autistic community. You know, there's got to be, everyone deserves a voice: siblings and parents, caregivers, professional teachers. And I think that's an important thing to remind people of. So thank you.
My pleasure. And Eileen, as we conclude to our interview, I want to talk about your work. I know we know that you created the Autism Cafe blog website. What motivated you to create the Autism Cafe? What motivated you in terms of doing that?
It's funny. I get asked that question a lot, and I was like, it just kind of happened. Like I started talking, so first thing that happened is that Charlie got diagnosed with autism, and then I wanted to keep my family in France informed, on autism. I wanted to kind of like raise awareness of autism within my friends group. You know how you have a private profile on Facebook and it's just your friends. So I started sharing there. And I wrote a post that's like, everyone was like, oh, you got to make that public. It's so good. So I made that post public. And little did you know, the thing went viral. That was a post in French. And that was just on my personal Facebook. And from there, it kind of like snowballed. And someone was like, oh, you should start a Facebook page. So I started a Facebook page. And that Facebook page reached a lot of people. And it's just snowballed from there. And people were like, oh, I can so relate to what you're saying, And it just made me feel less alone. Because as much as, I want to connect with parents of autistic people at the time, every time I met, not every time, but like I went to a party at Charlie's ABS Center when Charlie was 2. I was trying to connect with parents, people who get it, right? But all the kids were like talking and, they had challenges that were so different from Charlie's. So it was like I had met people that, I was supposed to get it, but nobody had a nonverbal child that I had met at that party, for instance. And then I went on Facebook and there were so many people who had nonverbal children and, who were going through the same thing. So it was a nice way for me to connect. It was really a way for me to connect at first. And then it turned into, raising awareness, sharing our story. And yeah, it just snowballed from there. And now I think my mission is just ready for people to understand how broad the spectrum is and that, autistic people are all different from each other. I love that quote from Dr. Stephen Shore. If you know one autistic person, you know one autistic person, because it's true. And I think that's why it's important that many autistic people share their stories.
Definitely. It's about sharing their stories, not only the achievements, but the defeats, the difficulties, the pains, the sad moments. That's what makes it a complete story. And that's what we're here for. And Eileen, I know that you wrote 2 books all across the spectrum and Be the One. Can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Yeah, so All Across the Spectrum was like my childhood dream. I always tell people when they ask me, what do you want to do? I want to write books. And, everyone would laugh. Ta-da! So yeah, that was like really, really great for me. When Charlie was diagnosed and I was diagnosed and everything like fell into place, I had just so much on my mind that I needed to like write about. It was just like crazy to me, that revelation that I was on the spectrum too, and that's why I struggled with this. That's why I struggled with that. That's why I was good at that, And then there was also the realization that, but wait, I have the same diagnosis as my son, but like he's nonverbal and, it seems different. And so my book was just about sharing about, my discovery of being autistic, but also about the challenges of raising a child with severe autism, and also about social media, because I was very new to social media then. And honestly, I didn't handle the hate as well as I do now. But I speak about that too, because I think any new parent who has a child being diagnosed, who goes to social media and sees the fighting, is probably thinking, oh my God. And, it must be like very overwhelming. So I speak about that a little bit. And then my second book, Be the One, it's more like a poetry book, self-help, inspirational, I guess. It's just for people. I don't want people to feel alone. And it's very, very raw and open. I speak about failure and failed relationships and anxiety and, overthinking and like very, very real things that I think a lot of people feel and don't speak about because, it's hard to be vulnerable. So it's a very vulnerable book.
Oh, definitely. And I know your books have had a profound impact, not only on autism, but also mental health in different areas of life. And your story and that, your story is truly valuable, Eileen, and your contributions, not only to autism, but also in society in general, when mental health and everything have been tremendous. I'm very proud of you, very proud of the work that you do for our community. And before we go, Eileen, I just wanted to ask you if you have a final message for society, community, parents about autism. Any special message for the autism community and the parents that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think first, don't forget about profound autism because, inspirational stories are great, but you got to remember that a lot of people are not going to have that happy ending that you see in the media, and we need help and we need support. And the last thing would be just remember that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And if someone on social media tells you the autistic community hates this, just know that it's not true. Whatever it is, they're going to tell you it's not true because there is not one autistic community. We're all different. We're all different people. And it's important to remember that we all have different views, and that's okay.
Well said. And Eileen, how can people find you on social media? And if you can share also your website as well.
Yeah, it's the Autism Cafe, one word, no spaces, on Instagram and Facebook. And then it's Eileen.Lamb on TikTok. And my website is theautismcafe.com.
Perfect. I'm going to put all your social media links and website if people are interested in buying your books and supporting your work, which, for me, your work is tremendous and important for our community. I'm going to put them on the post once this episode of My Time is published.
Thank you so much, Tony. It was a pleasure chatting with you as always.
Thank you. And this is your home. And you're always welcome to come here and talk about this, about our world, which is autism. And Eileen, again, thank you so much for having participated in this episode of My Time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. A very inspirational story indeed from Miss Eileen Lamb. And we really appreciate her work for the autism community. And so if you haven't done so, I invite you now to subscribe to my podcast in all the platforms, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and among others. And if you haven't done so yet, I invite you to please subscribe to all my social media under Tony Hernandez Pumarejo. And if you like this episode, share with everybody that you know. And I really appreciate your support always. So this has been Tony Hernandez Pumarejo for this episode of My Time with Tony Hernandez Pumarejo. And until next time, I'll see you around. God bless.
Well, this is the end of another episode of My Time with Tony Hernandez Pumarejo. Tony hopes you liked it. If you'd like to learn more about the work Tony does, subscribe to him on his social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, which is now X, and his LinkedIn page. You can also follow Tony on his website at TonyHernandezPumarejo.com. Also, if you are interested in getting a copy of his book, An Autism Unscripted Life, you can purchase it on Amazon or any book-selling platform. You can also obtain a copy through his website. So, until the next time you meet, thank you and have a wonderful day. Blessings.